Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. And I hope your week is starting off well. Today is a holiday, and so I still just want to do this and at least have it here for anyone who wants to watch it in the future. So today we'll be talking about the state portion of the examination. Now, if you remember from previous videos, the exam is two portions, the national and then the state. The national is 105 questions, right? And then you're graded on 100. And the state will be 45 questions, and you're only graded on 40 questions. So you will have some of those test questions in the curriculum, but you don't know which of the questions are your test questions. Therefore, you need to make sure that you are answering all questions like they are being graded. Now, for the state portion, rather, on the what's it called? The candidate handbook on page 18 of the candidate handbook, they give you the specific sections, specific topics where you will get questions on the exam. All right. Sorry if you heard that from the street, there's a car revving through. So here I just wanted to talk about like the certain portions of it and give you some things to think about as you're preparing. I've said this in the previous video and I'll say it again. When you're preparing, the candidate handbook and that outline is a good tool to use. So just get the pages of all of those topics. And as you're going through, go with a pencil and write down what you can think about when it comes to all of the topics. So let me go ahead and share that screen now. And I will stop. Okay, so here on my screen, this is the candidate handbook, and I will zoom in just a little bit more. So this is page 18. And this is your state specific. It's in two columns. So I'll zoom out so you can see it's two columns starting here, going all the way down to the end of the page and then coming back up on this side. Now, if you notice, so it's 1, 2, 3, and 4. But number 4 is managing broker / instructor only. So that doesn't apply to you who's getting your broker license. But if you're getting your managing broker license, then you also need to know those other portions. Now in your book, you will also have these portions here that are listed for managing broker and instructor only. So you'll see it in your book, and your instructor in class will go over that information, or whichever curriculum you're using, right? You have information about that in your coursework, but just know that for the exam, you may not get a lot of questions from those sections, okay? So starting here, licensing requirements, okay, 10 questions. So 10 questions from here, 20 questions from here, 10 questions from here as well. So that's your 40 questions. And then for the other exam, they'll kind of mix it up and have 6 questions from here. All right, so license exemptions. Anyone who's 18 or older, right? So the minimum age is 18 to get your license. So anyone who is 18 or over that's helping someone buy or sell real estate for compensation or in anticipation of compensation needs to be licensed. However, there are certain exemptions. For example, if you're selling your own home, you don't need to be licensed. If you are a resident manager, okay, this should be in your state law chapter, and it probably is also in your leasing chapter. So it's in 2 places in your book. The resident manager should be exempt. Now, who is the resident manager? Resident manager is a person who is living in the property as a tenant and helping the landlord manage the building. And sometimes they do this for a fee or for subsidized rent. Okay, so criteria: you must be living in the building to act as a resident manager. Sometimes how they may ask you these questions is, for example, the owner has 5 buildings, okay? Can you manage all 5 as a resident manager? The answer is no. You can only manage the one where you live. And so they could have 5 resident managers for all of their 5 buildings, okay? So please understand that distinction. You only are a resident manager. Think of the word resident. So you live there and you're managing the property. So that's one person who's exempt from a license. So I said, resident manager, I said, you're selling or buying your own property. Okay, you don't need a license for that. Or you're leasing your own property. You don't need a license for that. Also, in order to get referral fees in the real estate space, you need to be licensed. However, buildings can have referrals for their tenants. So residents in that building are able to refer their friends, but there are certain restrictions. So make sure you know the restriction. The price is they can't get more than $5,000 total for a 12-month period, and they cannot refer more than 3 people. Okay, so that's another restriction. So be sure to know that. And again, this will probably be in your leasing chapter and then might also be in your licensing law chapter, depending on the book that you're using. So those are some exemptions to getting your license. Some other exemptions that are in the book include someone who works for the federal or state government when they are performing their duties. So for example, the state is trying to sell off land. So one of their employees is selling it on behalf of the state. So those types of scenarios of that person, while they are performing their job function, will not need to be licensed. Okay. So be sure to check out your book for the exemptions. Activities requiring a license. So if someone is talking to members of the general public about real estate, they're expecting to get compensated, they're expecting a commission, they are helping with things like advertising, marketing, okay? In order to be compensated, right? They need to be licensed. So things that require a license are, just think, if I'm getting compensated to help you buy, sell, or lease, I need a license, okay? Does it mean you can't hire an assistant to help you with certain things? Of course you can. However, your assistant can only do certain tasks. They can't perform all the duties that you can perform as a licensed person, okay? So some of the duties that will require a license, for example, holding an open house that's open to the public, that's 100% requires a license. We have what's called a broker open. So the open house is only open to licensed agents. So an open house like that can be held by someone who is not licensed. But if you have an open house for members of the general public, then you must be licensed to host that open house, right? Helping someone collect rents, find tenants for their property, things like that, negotiating the lease, all of those things, right? You need a license, right? So the next one here, types of licenses, of course, you make sure you know the different types and know the courses. So for example, the broker license, 75-hour course, managing broker license is 75 plus the post, which is 45. So a total of 120, and then an additional 45. So it's a grand total of 165 hours for the managing broker license. And then the leasing agent license, I believe, is 15 hours. Yeah, it's 15 hours for that license. And that license is only restricted to leasing residential property only. So that title is the residential leasing agent. Okay. Now, speaking of personal assistance, which is the next thing to note. Now, personal assistance, you can kind of tie it back to when we were talking about activities requiring a license. Okay, so you hire an assistant, but your assistant can only perform certain duties. So for example, let's say I have a listing and someone calls the number and my assistant picks up the phone. Okay, so the assistant will, the person's like, hey, I saw this listing. I just want to find out more information about it. So the assistant will grab the listing, maybe on the computer or a piece of paper, and essentially read off what I have put on there. For example, yes, it's a 3-bedroom house. The price right now is $350. It's on 123 Main Street, blah, blah, blah. Now, the person on the phone may ask, do you know how old the roof is? So my assistant will look on the sheet that I have and see if I've put any information about the roof. It's like, oh no, there isn't anything here about the roof. I can find out from the agent and, get back to you, or I can transfer you to the agent to get more information. Maybe the person on the phone asks something like, do you know if the seller will take a lower price? The assistant's, I don't know, right? Personally, even as an agent, I don't know. Once you bring an offer, I can present it to them and tell you what they're going to say. But that type of a question, even if I as an agent know the answer to that, my assistant will just tell them, hey, I can transfer you over to the agent, and the agent will give you more information. The assistant will not go ahead and divulge, talk more about the property than what's on the listing. Okay. And then remember, I talked about the open house. The assistant can do that. The assistant can put keys in the lockbox, okay, on my behalf. Go put the key on the property and put the lockbox there. Put up signs in front of the house with the seller's permission, okay? Put signs in front of the house as well. The assistant can do that. The assistant can open the door for another agent. So let's say we have a listing. The seller does not want a lockbox there, okay? Now, an agent wants to show the property to their client. The assistant can go there, open the door, and let that agent and their client go into the home and view the property. But the assistant cannot be there if another agent isn't there with that client. So there has to be an agent at that showing with the client. All right. So those are some things to note about the personal assistant. Okay. All right. Hey, Mr. Goodfella. Sunday National Park, second time going again. Okay, so this coming Sunday, you're taking the national portion again? Okay. Yeah, and feel free to drop your questions in the chat and I'll go over them at the end. All right. Awesome. So let me do this real quick. And all right, so speaking of going back to this list, eligibility for license, including the sponsor card. All right, so remember when we're talking about the licenses, you have to have completed the course before you can take the exam. Now, remember the age limit for each license, okay? So for the broker license, 18 years or older. For the managing broker, it's 20 years. Now, how do you remember it's 20? You have to have had your broker license for at least 2 years before you can become a managing broker. So you're 18 when you get your broker license. Then before you get your managing broker license, that'll be 2 years. So that at that point, you'd be 20. So that's a good way to remember that it's 18 and then 20. So you have to have at least 2 years as a broker before you can become a managing broker. And then for the leasing agent, it's also 18 as well. Now, For the broker license, if you remember in your coursework, right, they tell you that you have the 75 hours that you must complete for the initial class, okay, the one that you guys are taking. Then before your first renewal, you have to complete 45 hours. So 75 plus 45 is 120. Okay, so 120 is the number of hours required to be a licensed broker, right? To get your license as a broker, you need pre and post education. So both of them together gives you the 120 hours. So why I bring that up is sometimes they may throw a question like that at you and you're looking for 75 and 75 is not one of the options. So also look for 120, but they won't confuse you with both. Okay, so it's either 75 as pre-licensing or 120 as the total number of hours you need as a broker. And also in terms of eligibility, they also ask for good moral character as well. So there might be, for the most part, if you don't have certain types of criminal offenses in your history, you should be able to get your license, even though you've had some run-ins with the law, okay? Depending on what it is. Now, when you are applying for your license, they ask you 3 questions. And they ask you, number 1, are you behind on state income taxes? Number 2, are you defaulting on state student loans? Okay, so not federal, but state loans. Number 3, child support. So those are the 3 main things. They will ask you those questions and you answer yes or no. If you say yes to any of them, they may not give you your license. But if you lie and say yes and say no, but the answer is really yes, if they find out, because remember that's public record, they could suspend or revoke your license. So please don't lie. And then the final thing they ask for is they ask you if you have at least a high school diploma or a GED. Now, they don't ask you to show proof, but it's an honor system. So they ask you, you're saying yes, and you're essentially like swearing in a court of law that you don't have anything against you. But if you do, and they find out in the future, again, you could be disciplined for that. So eligibility, age, education, and then your character. All right. So those are the main things they look out for. So a few other things here on the screen when it comes to this licensing requirements, right? In your book too, they talk a little bit about the examination. So use that as a way for you even to prepare for the exam, right? Because they tell you how many questions, they tell you if you pass, this is what happens. If you don't pass, this is what happens. So keep those in mind as you're preparing. License renewal. Make sure you remember the dates. We renew every 2 years. Even years are for the broker license. Odd years are for the managing broker license. And everyone renews April 30th. Okay, April 30th. Even year or odd year. So we're currently in an even year. Therefore, all brokers renewed in April. And then next year, all managing brokers will be renewing their license and completing their continuing education hours as well. So be sure to remember what those hours are. For the broker, it is 12 hours. And for the managing broker, it is 24 hours. All right. And you can complete up to 12 hours in one day, but you can't do more than 12 hours of CE in one day. Change in licensee information. This potential exam question, 24 hours. Once there's a change in your information, notify IDFPR within 24 hours. Changing your email, changing your phone number, changing your address, Change of name, notify IDFPR within 24 hours. And then reciprocity, understand reciprocity. I have a video on it, but these are states that we have some sort of agreement with because our licensing process and the way we practice real estate are similar. So with these states, it's easier to get a license in that state if you've been licensed here in Illinois for at least 2 years, and then vice versa. If you've been licensed there for at least 2 years, it's easier to get your license here in Illinois. Now for the exam, because the states can change, they may not ask you what states we have reciprocity with, but they could ask you the criteria. So make sure that you've been licensed for at least 2 of the last 3 years. Your license is active and not under probation or anything in your home state, all right? And then you could easily take for Illinois, you take the state exam only, the state portion only, and then apply for your license. All right, and you could do this on the managing broker level and also on the broker level. So whichever license you have in your home state, you can then transfer that over to Illinois. And then finally here, the recovery fund. The recovery fund, understand what it's for. The recovery fund is for members of the public who have been hurt by actions of a licensed person or their employees. So maybe a licensed person did something and because of that, somebody lost money. Okay, so in Illinois, we have the recovery fund. And what this fund does is it keeps money in a fund, right? So money is set aside and the person who has been grieved or hurt by me or by a licensed person would have to go through the courts first and meet certain criteria. So they have to notify IDFPR that they're filing this lawsuit and there are some time frames. So know those time frames. Some are 7 days, some are 30 days. And the lawsuit must be filed within 2 years of the knowledge of that activity. So you know it happened, you make sure that you go ahead and apply. And file the lawsuit and notify IDFPR so that they know you have a litigation pending. Okay. Now, what happens to a licensee's license once a fund is paid out because of something they did? So if a fund is paid out, essentially your license becomes inactive immediately until you've paid back what was paid out on your behalf plus interest. Okay. And some of the things they will pay out to are not just the judgment, but also any attorney fees. So reasonable attorney fees they will pay out and other court costs. Okay. So this is not a place you want to find yourself as a licensed person, but please know that it exists and the purpose of the fund, know the purpose of the fund as well. Now, this second part, the laws, rules, and regulations. So in your book, you're going to have like a lot of the laws that we need to abide by, the ones at least we need to know for the exam. If you wanted to read the actual law, it's also online. It's easy to find. And you can find the law and go over everything just so that you know what you're getting yourself into. Because ignorance is not an excuse, right? If you break the law and you're reported or it's found out, then there are consequences for your actions. So, purpose of the license law. On the exam, they may ask you this. Just know that it is never to protect the licensed person. The purpose is always to protect members of the public. Okay, so the purpose of the law, the license law, is to protect members of the public against incompetent licensees. And just making sure that we are acting professionally and competently and ethically as well, right? So that's the purpose of the law. So we're protecting members of the general public. Advertising. Remember blind ads, right? In Illinois, you cannot just advertise. Sorry, as a broker, you can't just advertise in your name. You must advertise in your brokerage name. And so that's why, in our email signatures and even social media, all of that, we have to state the broker that we are with, because otherwise it will be a blind advertisement. So if you're driving down the road, every now and then you will see some signs that say, "We buy houses," and then there's a phone number. Okay, no name, nothing. Okay, that should not be a licensed real estate agent. Okay, because the law requires that we give full disclosure. So we have to put our name, put the brokerage you're with. Depending on what it is, you should even put the city that your broker is in. So Chicago, Illinois, for example, would be for me. And oh yeah, one other thing. It was added in 2019 when there was the most recent update to the law. Your logo size or your name as a broker should not be larger than your sponsoring broker's name or logo. So for me, I'm with EXP, so I will put EXP there, and then my name will be smaller or the same font size. So it can't be bigger. It can be the same size, but it can't be bigger than my company name. Okay. Broker and I'm thinking this is managing broker relationship or broker-broker relationships. So understand that you can only work for one sponsoring broker. And yeah, you can host an open house for another sponsoring broker. So if the listing is not with your office, you can't do the open house for that listing because it's technically working for another sponsoring broker. Make sure that you remember the employment agreement that you must have with your sponsoring broker, and it must be in writing. So that's one of the documents that must be in writing according to our Illinois law. Commissions. There are math questions under commissions, so do practice those. Most people get questions on commissions, calculating commissions, and then also knowing that you can only get a commission if you're licensed. So no assistant should be getting a commission from real estate transactions. Right? That's against the law. Finder's fees, referral fees, you must be licensed to get those as well. So if I'm advertising, hey, I have buyers, I'm looking for agents to help these buyers, I must be licensed in order to get a referral fee from them. Also, rental finding services also need to be licensed in order to practice here in Illinois. Now here, ownership issues, land trust and homestead. With land trusts, this is where real estate is in a trust. And this is usually done to protect the identity of the actual beneficiary. You can be the trustor and beneficiary for a land trust in Illinois, meaning you create the trust and name yourself as the beneficiary for that trust. And then with homestead, there are two ways you can find homestead in your book. First way is if you're married and you live in the property, so with your spouse, it's your primary residence. Even if you own the property by yourself on paper, your spouse has homestead rights to that home. Therefore, you cannot sell the property without your spouse's approval. So your spouse has to sign off on all the paperwork, essentially signing off their homestead rights to the home. If not, you can get an agent, you alone sign all the paperwork, the agent markets the property, gets a buyer, we get to closing, they find out, oh, you're married and this is your primary residence. We need your spouse to sign this document, otherwise it's not going to close. Okay, so that's that happens. Even if you are separated or estranged, you haven't talked in a while, as long as you are still legally married, all right, your spouse has homestead rights to the property. Secondly, homestead is it has to do with credit. Now, if you have unsecured debts, okay, and there's a lawsuit against you and you own real estate, now the judgment is let's say you owe $200,000, okay? That's the judgment. Your house is worth 350. So let me write it down so that it kind of helps with tracking what I'm saying. So I'm talking about Homestead here. So let's say that you have a judgment of 200,000. Your house is worth 350. So this is for your house. And you have unsecured, let's say your mortgage is, let's do the mortgage first. Your mortgage is, no, sorry, I'm doing this on the fly. Hold on, let's do it this way instead. Let's make this bigger, 400, okay? And your house is worth 410, 420. Your mortgage, the outstanding mortgage is 390, okay? And then final thing is your credit card or unsecured debt. Let's just say unsecured debt is 40,000. Okay, unsecured debt. So this is what you owe. All right, now we sell your house. Okay, we sell your house. We pay off the mortgage. Now we're left with 30,000. Sorry, it's a bad example. This is a bad example. I should have prepared a better example. But let's say, no, let's just leave it as the credit card. Let's leave the 400 judgment. Okay, so we sell the house. Okay, now we're left with 30 grand. According to the law, if you're married, you get the 30. If you're single, you get 15,000. And then whatever is left goes to your unsecured debts. Okay, so that's the other homestead that's out there. So essentially what that means is you're at least getting some money to begin your life afresh instead of paying the unsecured credit cards first. You get something first, and then whatever is left is used to compensate the unsecured debts. All right, hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, feel free to reach out and I can re-explain it. Okay. So that's Homestead. And then some other laws that govern our practice are here as well. So like I said, feel free to go over these and make sure that you're writing what you remember about them. Legal description, the different types of legal description that we have, right? Transfer tax stamps, that's a math calculation. Make sure you remember the formula and know how to plug that in if you should get a question on that as well. Here, remembering that we don't practice law. So if you get questions where it's getting into a legal type, getting into something legal with your clients, you're looking for the answer that says, direct them to a licensed attorney to help them with the matter, because we're not attorneys, so we shouldn't be giving legal advice. Okay, so none of the answers where you're giving legal advice would be the right answer. So keep that in mind. We don't give legal advice. We refer them to the right party. Same with like tax advice as well. So there might be some tax write-offs a person can get when they buy real estate. We all know that, right? It's on the internet. However, I'm not a licensed CPA. So on the exam, I'm not going to pick the answer that says, I will tell them what to do. I'm going to pick the answer that directs them to the right source. So it directs them to the CPA. Okay. So remember in the exam, you're picking the best answer, not always just the right answer, because you may have two right answers, but you want to pick the best answer. And of course, the last one here, Human Rights Act. Please remember all the protected classes in Illinois as well. Okay, because that's huge right now, essentially. So you probably get a question or two on that. And then understanding contracts, right? Contract law is also in the national portion, but we deal with contracts here as well. So understanding how contracts work, interference with contracts. So we're not licensed attorneys, like I said, right? So we should just stay in our lane. We're not interfering in another agent's relationship with their client. So we're not talking directly with the other party. We're talking to the agent, and then the agent communicates with their client. All right. Now, this is here, but it actually happens in real life. There was an agent who was just telling us, and she doesn't know who the person is, but she had a listing, and another agent who also tried to get the listing keeps going back to the seller and trying to communicate with them. And the seller doesn't want to release the person's name, so she doesn't know who the person is, but she's, it's driving her crazy because this person is violating the law. So please know that for the exam and also for practice, because if she knows who this person is, she'll probably report them. And I don't know what the ramifications is, but just don't do it. Here, disclosures. Remember, we always disclose who we're working with. If you're working for the seller, make sure that any potential buyer knows that you represent the seller. If you need to have it in writing, actually, you should have it in writing so that there is no question of, oh, you didn't tell me, right? When you are a designated agent for a seller, a buyer, or if you're doing due agency, make sure you have all the right, disclosures in place. So if you're doing due agency, for example, please remember, due agency is legal in Illinois only if it is disclosed to all parties involved. So it's not legal if it's not disclosed. Okay, so if you ever get a question where they are describing due agency, and in the question, there's no disclosure in writing, not just verbal disclosure, it needs to be in writing. If there is no disclosure, that agent is doing something illegal. So keep that in mind for sure on the exam. As an agent, you should have at least 3 documents signed by the buyer and the seller that allow for dual agency. So the first document will be the listing agreement. The seller in the listing agreement will say, yes, I agree to dual agency, or it could be an attachment to the listing agreement. So you get that first from the seller. Then now you have a buyer. The buyer has to agree independently for dual agency to happen. Then if these 2 people want to have a transaction together, then they must sign a document together saying, for this property, we know that this licensee is acting as a dual agent. And because this licensee is acting as a dual agent, these are the things the licensee can and cannot do. Also, remember, according to the Quinlan and Tyson lawsuit of 1966, we don't write these contracts, right? We use pre-printed forms. So all these forms I'm talking about, we already have the forms for them. These contracts I'm talking about, we already have the forms. All you have to do is find them and make sure they're filled out. Okay. Now on the exam, one thing to remember is, and I think someone asked that last week, if you're working for a seller, you also have to have their permission to advertise their property. Okay, so you must have their permission to advertise their property, because if you do not, you're violating the License Act as well. Okay, so maybe there's an example where you have a listing and then it's like, should you put a sign in front of the home? The answer is yes, if you have the seller's permission to do so. Or the answer is no, because the seller says they don't want a sign in front of their home. All right. There are some sellers who don't even want, I've had sellers say we don't want a sign, right? So you need to be aware of that. If you're going to advertise on the radio, right, make sure that whatever form of advertising though, you have that in writing. And in our listing agreements, the one that we customarily use, it's all in there. And if they want to opt out, they can opt out of them. And of course, see here, property disclosures, making sure that you are disclosing everything that is required by law, the Residential Property Disclosure Act, and then you're not disclosing things that you're not supposed to disclose. For example, health of people. Okay, people with HIV/AIDS, people who are disabled, people with chronic health. We're not talking about people's health. Okay, we're selling the house, not the people. Okay, so this is health. And then actually going down here to human rights laws, right? We're not looking for things like who are the neighbors. Those are not the right answers. You're not trying to steer people away or towards a particular neighborhood. You need to be asking your clients where they want to live. So those types of things, when you get questions, those are what you're looking for in the answers. And those will be hints. You're like, oh no, this is talking about the people. This is probably not the right answer. We're trying to sell the house here. Okay. And then you can eliminate the two that are incorrect and pick the right one. For stigmatized properties, now according to our License Act, a licensee will not be held liable for not disclosing things about a property that have nothing to do with the physical condition of that property. All right, so the seller's agent isn't required to disclose some of these issues. Now, if you're working with a buyer, right, it would be good to let your buyer know, hey, for example, I know this was the site of blah, blah, blah crime that you saw on TV. So I know it's the scene of that crime. So as your buyer's agent, I'm letting you know, and then you could decide if you want to buy that house or not. Okay, I've had people ask me before, oh, it looks like someone died here. I don't know that somebody died in the house, right? So what I would then say is, yeah, that's a possibility, right? Or yeah, it's an old house and it looks like maybe the people who were here have passed, but that's all I know, right? But if I knew more, then I would disclose that information to my client. But we must disclose material defects. So material defects are those things that if someone knows, it could alter the chain of events or the result of the events. So I know about like physical conditions of the property. If you know there is like pending litigation, right? You should at least like alert people so that they know what they're getting themselves into before they get into that situation. So those types of things we're required to disclose. With the residential real property disclosure form that the seller has to fill out, he asks a lot of those material defect questions. However, as an agent, it is also our duty to make sure that if there are things that are not marked on that form that eventually become a problem, we notify our seller. The seller needs to update the form, and then we also need to make sure that we're notifying any potential buyers. And on the exam, you don't wait to be asked about material defects. You volunteer the information up front. Okay, you volunteer the information up front. So that's one of the, sometimes you may get a question like that. You're looking for the one that says you disclose this to any potential buyers, even before they ask you about the issue. All right. So that is essentially the sections. So there are only 3 sections really on the state portion for you guys. And I know that they tend to ask like scenario type questions. So they'll give you stories. So be sure to read the story. And as you're reading, there might be things that don't even have anything to do with the question they're asking. All right, they're just thrown in there to distract you. So be mindful of that. Okay. One thing as well about like the person you're representing, so your client, know that if you are on the seller's side, the seller is your client, not the buyer. The buyer can have their own agent, or the buyer can be unrepresented. Okay, so if you're not a dual agent and the buyer is not your client, the buyer could be unrepresented or have another agent. The only person who is your client and who you owe fiduciary duties to would be the seller. Okay. Same thing if you're on the buyer's side. If you're on the buyer's side, the seller is not your client. You are also not a sub-agent of the seller. The seller could be a customer to you or a consumer to you, but they're not your client. So in Illinois, there is that separation, okay? You're on one side and the seller is on the other side if you're the buyer. Buyer on one side, seller on the other side. Their agents are with them, okay? Now, if you're a dual agent, you're in the middle, right? You're working for both, but you cannot disclose confidential information between the parties, okay? So that's really like an overview of the state portion of the exam. Again, it's only 45 questions, and you have an hour and a half for all 45 questions. So that should, I mean, with adequate preparation, let me put it that way, with adequate preparation, you should be able to get through it in less than an hour and a half, okay? The 45 questions. Now in here, they have some sample questions, and I'll just go over them real quick. So the first one is about freehold estates. Which of the following interests in property is held by a person? So I'm reading here. Is held by a person who is granted a lifetime use of a property that will be transferred to a third party upon the death of the lifetime user. Okay, so for me, keywords here are lifetime. So once I see life, so for the life of someone, I'm already thinking life estate. Okay, so then I keep reading the question. So it is transferred to a third party upon the death of the lifetime user. So that is a life estate. Okay. This person is, the user is the life tenant. Okay. The user is the life tenant. A remainder estate in this question will be the third party. So the third party is waiting for the lifetime user to pass away, and then they get ownership of the property. So at this point, they have a remainder interest in that property. Okay, they have a remainder interest in the property. So they get, essentially, like they get what's remaining after this person passes on. Okay. If the question said that upon the death of the lifetime user, the property goes back to the original owner, then this would be reversionary. Okay, so it's going back, it's reverting to the previous owner when the life tenant or the lifetime user passes away. And number 3 here, this is a type of leasehold estate. So it's a type of tenancy. It's not ownership. All right, so that won't be one of the answers. Second one here is, which of the following statements best identifies the meaning of the term rescission of a contract? So rescission, think about going backwards. So rescission of a contract, we're going back on our initial agreement. Okay. So first one says a ratification of the contract by all parties. Second, a return of all parties to their condition before the contract was executed. Okay, that kind of sounds like the right answer. 3, a transfer or assignment of a particular responsibility from one of the parties to another. No, that's not like backing out. And then finally, a review of the contract by a legal counsel of either party that may result in a cancellation without penalty or further obligation. No, this would be a review. All right, so the answer is return. So we're going back, we're returning. Number 3, C here. Which of the following clauses in the mortgage allows the lender to demand loan repayment if the borrower sells the property? Right? So this is national, right? This is not Illinois specific. So which of the following clauses in the mortgage allows the lender to demand loan payment if a borrower sells the property? So for this one, you just got to know the vocabulary, all right? A defeasance clause is where after you pay off the mortgage, they need to take, it's a clause in the document, the loan document that says when the loan is paid off, the lien should be taken off the property. Prepayment is, again, paying ahead of time on the loan. Acceleration is, like, think of the word, you're moving something forward. So an acceleration clause is not what we're talking about. So the answer here is alienation. So with the alienation clause, or it's also known as the due on sale clause, right? Alienation clause or the due on sale clause. Due on sale clause essentially means when the property is being sold, the loan should be paid off to the lender. And what this does is it prevents an assumption. Prevents, let me put it this way, prevents a loan assumption, meaning the buyer cannot take over the seller's loan. Okay, the buyer cannot take over a seller's loan. The seller pays off their loan and the buyer gets a fresh loan with their own interest rate and everything. Okay, so this is national portion. And then scrolling back up to the last two questions here. And if you check the answers, they're correct. How much cash must a buyer furnish in addition to a $2,500 deposit if the lending institution grants a 90% loan on an $80,000 property? Right? So let's think about that for a second. The house is $80,000. Okay, we're getting a loan for 90%. So that means we're going to put a down payment of 10%, right? We talked about it last time, we talked about financing. So the 90% loan, so our loan to value ratio would be 90%, meaning our down payment is 10%. And then we already paid a deposit of $2,500. So what's the difference between our 10% and $2,500? So that's essentially what the question is asking. So 10% of 80,000 is 8,000. Okay. And then 8,000 minus 2,500. And that gives you 5,500. Okay, so our answer would be this 5,500 is the other amount that we have to bring to closing. Now, sometimes the question could be just this simple, where it's just straightforward. Other times they may also include other things to this question and ask you how much cash do the person bring to closing in addition to a $2,500 deposit if the lending institution grants a 90% loan on an $80,000 property with 2 points and 1 loan origination fee. Okay, 2 points, 1 loan origination fee. So we already know the down payment that we have to bring is 5,500. So now we need to calculate the points and the loan origination fee. So points, 2 points is 2% of the loan amount. The loan origination fee, 1% of the loan amount as well. So in this situation, we need to find out what the loan amount is and then calculate these numbers, add them to the 5,500, and that will give us the answer. All right, so let's do that real quick. Our down payment is 8,000, so 80,000 minus 8,000 will give us our loan amount. That should be 72. Yeah, 72,000 is our loan. All right. So you could do this two ways. You could do 2 points and then you could do one loan origination fee, but the formula is the same. So I'm just going to do 3%. All right, 2 points is 2% of the loan amount. 1% loan origination fee is also 1% of the loan amount. So 2 plus 1 is 3. So 3% of 72,000. Okay. And let's do the math for that. 72,000 times 3% is 2,160. So then we add 5,500 to this. And that gives us 7,660. All right. So if they give you a question similar to this, just again, start from the beginning and kind of break it down into small chunks and then work on it that way. Okay. And then final answer, which of the following final question. Which of the following single family residences would get the most accurate appraisal by applying the reproduction cost approach to value? Okay, so reproduction costs. So when you think about the cost approach, we're thinking about properties that don't have a lot of comparables. So we want to figure out how much is it going to cost us to build it from scratch. And with reproduction, we're using the same materials, not replica of the materials. So for cost approach, it won't be a rental because with a rental, you're using the income approach. Vacant property, you could use, if it's an income producing, you would use the income approach. If it's residential, for example, you could use the sales approach. So those two we can eliminate. Now with C, a new property or a historical property. Now the question is the most accurate. And so for the most accurate, it would be the historical because it's reproduction. We're thinking about, okay, if we're constructing like a cathedral, for example, or like an old museum with the pillars in the front of like stone and then the hand carved things in, on the outside and on the inside, that would be more like a historical building versus something that's built today. And so the most accurate would be a historical property. Okay. All right, so that's about it for me today. Again, this is going to be up so you can review this and pause and go over it again. Why I did the questions here at the end was just to kind of give you an idea of how to process the questions when you get them, because a lot of times you may not know the answer, but you're able to eliminate the wrong answers and figure out the right one. Okay, so do that practice as you go through preparing for the exam. And again, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or in the Facebook group. And I'll do in the comments. In the comments, feel free to drop them in the comments, and I will do my best to respond. Okay. So I will see you all same time next week, all right, from 12 noon till 1 p.m. And Mr. Goodfella, hope you'll be back with some good news next week. And yeah, we'll go from there. All right, so you all have a wonderful, wonderful Monday and be safe.